I'm Michael Porter, a carpenter who sold everything to give my daughter Rachel her dream life. After driving 3 days to visit her Connecticut mansion, she begged me, "Don't tell anyone you're my father. Say your business friend." 40 years of sacrifice, and I'd become her shameful secret. She was ashamed of the calloused hands that built her fortune. But I had her house deed in my pocket, proof that her embarrassing old father owned everything she was hiding behind.
The August heat shimmered off the Connecticut pavement as I pulled my weathered Chevy into the circular driveway of 47 Willowbrook Lane. 3 days of driving through Nebraska's endless plains, Ohio's industrial corridors, and Pennsylvania's winding mountains, all leading to this moment. My hands trembled slightly as I turned off the engine, not from the journey's exhaustion, but from the anticipation of finally seeing my daughter Rachel after 2 years of carefully scheduled phone calls and conveniently canceled visits. Through the truck's dusty windshield, I watched the afternoon sun paint everything in golden perfection. The manicured hedges, the three-car garage housing vehicles worth more than I'd made in a decade, the fountain bubbling with crystal-clear water. This was Rachel's dream realized, the life she'd built with my life savings as its foundation. "Dad," Rachel's voice carried across the driveway, but her body language screamed something different. She moved quickly, almost frantically, positioning herself between my truck and the neighbor's perfectly trimmed yard. Her silk dress probably cost more than my monthly utilities, and every strand of her professionally styled hair spoke of a life I'd never imagined for the little girl who used to help me sand furniture in our garage. I reached for my old canvas duffel, the same one that had carried my lunch to construction sites for 30 years, when she whispered the words that would haunt me. "Listen, Dad, before we go in, just tell them you're an old business associate from Portland. The neighbors, I mean, and maybe Matthew's colleagues if they stop by. They don't need to know that we're related." The words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. 43 years of raising her alone after her mother's death, of skipping meals so she could have new school clothes, of working double shifts to pay for her MBA, reduced to a business associate. A lie as fragile as the social facade she'd apparently built her entire life upon. "Sure, Rachel," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded foreign, hollow. "Whatever makes you comfortable." Relief washed over her face so quickly it made my stomach turn. She'd been terrified I might refuse, might insist on being acknowledged as the man who'd given everything for her success. The neighbor's lawnmower started up next door, and I saw him wave, a genuine, warm gesture that I returned with a smile that felt like broken glass in my mouth. "Beautiful area," I said to him, playing my assigned role. "Rachel's been kind enough to show me around while I'm in town on business." The light tasted bitter, but not as bitter as watching my daughter's shoulders relax with relief. As we walked toward her front door, past roses I'd taught her to plant beneath windows I'd shown her how to properly seal, I realized I'd driven across an entire country not to visit my daughter, but to audition for the role of stranger in her carefully curated life. If you've ever felt the sting of being someone's shameful secret, don't scroll past. Hit that subscribe button, because someone out there needs to know they're not alone in this pain. The dining room chandelier cast shadows across crystal glasses and fine china, but nothing could illuminate the darkness of being seated at the far end of the table, physically present, but emotionally exiled from the family I'd built. Matthew carved the imported lamb with surgical precision, his Yale-class ring catching the light with every measured movement. Rachel fluttered around the table like a nervous butterfly, refilling wine glasses and adjusting napkins with the desperate energy of someone performing for an audience that might judge her at any moment. Their children, Sophia and little James, sat with practiced posture that seemed unnatural for a 13-year-old and 8-year-old. "So, Mr. Porter," Matthew's voice carried the casual authority of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Rachel tells me you're in construction consulting. Must be quite different from our line of work here in finance." Construction consulting, the sanitized version of my 40 years laying foundations, fixing roofs, and building homes with these weathered hands. I nodded, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Different skills, same principles. You need a solid foundation whether you're building houses or portfolios. Something flickered in Matthew's eyes. Recognition? Dismissal? He quickly returned to discussing his latest merger, dropping names and numbers like breadcrumbs of his success. Rachel hung on every word with practiced adoration, while simultaneously shooting me warning glances whenever I opened my mouth. Young James, blessed with the honesty that privilege had yet not trained out of him, looked at me with curious eyes. "Mom said you knew her when she was little. Did you teach her stuff?" The table fell silent. Rachel's fork paused midway to her mouth. I could see her scrambling for a way to redirect, to minimize, to continue the elaborate fiction. But James's innocent question had cut straight to the bone. "I taught her everything I knew," I said quietly, meeting Rachel's panicked eyes. "How to fix things when they break, how to build something from nothing, how to stand tall even when the ground feels shaky." "Cool!" James exclaimed. "Like when you taught me to use the level last summer, Mom?" Rachel's face flushed. Apparently, some lessons had survived her social metamorphosis, even if their source had been erased. Yes, something like that, sweetie. Now, finish your vegetables." The conversation shifted to safer territories: Sophia's violin recital, the country club's upcoming gala, vacation plans for Martha's Vineyard. I sat at my designated end of the table, watching my grandchildren grow up as strangers, listening to my daughter orchestrate a life where I was edited out like an embarrassing photo from a wedding album. Matthew's phone buzzed with what he described as urgent business from Tokyo, and he excused himself with the importance of someone whose time was too valuable for family dinners. The children scattered to their rooms for homework and video games. Rachel and I were left alone with the weight of unspoken truths between us. "The guest room is ready," she said, already moving to clear plates, avoiding eye contact. "The bathroom's across the hall. Fresh towels in the cabinet." I stood to help with the dishes. Old habits die hard. But she waved me off. "The housekeeper comes tomorrow. Just go rest. You must be tired from the drive." Tired, yes, but not from the miles. From the performance. From pretending to be a stranger in a life I'd made possible. From sitting at the margins of my own family's story. This kind of pain changes you. If you're still watching, if this resonates with your own hidden hurts, please hit that like button. Sometimes the smallest gestures help us feel less alone. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep in the guest room that felt more like exile than hospitality, I discovered something that would change everything. A locked box in the garage containing the very memories Rachel had banished from her perfect life. Sleep eluded me like truth at that dinner table. The Egyptian cotton sheets felt like restraints, the climate-controlled air too perfect, too artificial. By 2 a.m., I gave up the pretense and wandered downstairs, my bare feet silent on the imported marble. The house slept around me, every room a testament to success built on foundations its inhabitants preferred to forget. The garage door stood slightly ajar. Matthew's Mercedes hadn't quite triggered the sensor. I slipped through, finding myself in a space larger than my entire Portland home. 3 luxury vehicles sat like sleeping giants, surrounded by labeled storage systems and sports equipment that looked barely used. But there, pushed behind the Christmas decorations and camping gear that had probably never seen actual wilderness, sat a battered cardboard box with my handwriting. Rachel's childhood, handle with care. My hands shook as I pulled it forward, dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light. Inside, preserved like archaeological treasures, lay the artifacts of our real life together. Photos of Rachel at 7, grinning toothlessly while holding the birdhouse we'd built. Her high school graduation, where she'd sobbed in my arms, thanking me for believing in her. The Father's Day card made from construction paper, where she'd written, "My daddy builds houses, but he built my whole world." Beneath the photos, wrapped in tissue paper like something precious, sat the wooden jewelry box I'd made for her 16th birthday. Inside, she'd kept every letter I'd written during her college years, each one containing a $20 bill I could barely spare, and words of encouragement when she'd wanted to quit. You were made of stronger stuff than you know. Remember, diamonds are just coal that handled pressure well. Love, Dad. A sound behind me. Soft footsteps. Rachel stood in the doorway, silk pajamas and perfect posture, but her face carried an expression I hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. Raw. Unguarded. Real. You kept them, I said, holding up the jewelry box. She started, then stopped. For once, she had no script, no performance ready. I couldn't throw them away, but I couldn't display them either. Do you understand? No, I said honestly. I don't understand how love becomes something to hide. She moved closer, sinking down beside me on the concrete floor. Probably the first time those pajamas had touched anything less than 600 thread count. It's not the love I'm hiding, Dad. It's the reminder of where I came from. These people, Matthew's world, they wouldn't understand someone who worked with their hands, who sacrificed instead of invested, who built actual things instead of portfolios. So you build a life on lies instead. Tears rolled down her cheeks, the first genuine emotion I'd seen since arriving. I built a life on the foundation you gave me. I painted over it so no one could see the original structure. I pulled out the photo of us fishing at Crater Lake, both of us laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Remember this day? You caught your first bass and we cooked it over the campfire. You said it was better than any restaurant. I told Matthew I learned to fish at summer camp, she whispered. The admission hung between us like a confession in the dark. Here, in this garage, surrounded by the truth she'd boxed away, my daughter finally looked like herself again. Not the Connecticut socialite, but the girl who believed her daddy could fix anything. I'm not ashamed of you, she said, though her voice suggested she was trying to convince herself. I'm ashamed of being ashamed. Does that make sense? If you've ever loved someone who was embarrassed by you, you know this exact pain. Don't let this story disappear into your feed. Subscribe now, because these truths need to be heard. The meeting with my lawyer would reveal something Rachel never knew, that her entire Connecticut dream house, the foundation of her new identity, actually belonged to me. Tom Richardson's law office occupied a modest strip mall in Hartford, 40 minutes from Rachel's pristine neighborhood. I'd found him through a contractor friend, someone who understood property law and family complications. The morning after my garage discovery, I'd called him from my truck, parked at a rest stop where Rachel couldn't overhear. The documents are clear, Mr. Porter, Tom said, spreading the papers across his desk. The property at 47 Willowbrook Lane is legally yours. Your name is on the deed as primary owner, with Rachel listed as secondary. The $200,000 down payment came entirely from your account, the sale of your business, your retirement savings, your tool collection. I stared at the signatures, remembering that day 3 years ago when Rachel had called, breathless with excitement about finding the perfect house. It's for our family, Dad, she'd promised. A place where we can all be together, where you can finally relax and enjoy what you've earned. She never transferred the deed? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Never. Legally, she and Matthew are your tenants. You could evict them tomorrow if you chose. You could sell the property. You could move in yourself. Tom's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes held sympathy. What would you like to do? I thought about Rachel's tears in the garage, about my grandchildren growing up without knowing their real heritage, about Matthew's casual dismissal of everything I represented. But mostly, I thought about the little girl who'd once believed her daddy hung the moon. I draw up a trust, I said finally. The house transfers to my grandchildren when they turn 25, but with conditions. Tom's pen moved across his legal pad. What kind of conditions? They need to know where it came from, the real story, not the sanitized version. They need to understand that their grandfather built things with his hands, that their mother grew up in a 2-bedroom ranch where love mattered more than square footage. They need to know the truth. And until then, Rachel and her family can stay, but I want it documented, every payment they make, every improvement, every tax bill. She needs to understand she's living in my house, even if she can't admit it to her neighbors. Tom nodded, making notes. This is generous considering the circumstances. It's not about generosity, I said, fingering the fishing photo I'd taken from the garage. It's about making sure my grandchildren know that real foundations aren't made of concrete and rebar. They're made of sacrifice and love and truth. The drive back to Willowbrook Lane felt different. The tree-lined streets, the perfect lawns, the expensive cars, they all looked like props in a play where I suddenly understood my real role. I wasn't the shameful secret. I was the unacknowledged foundation holding everything up. Rachel was arranging flowers when I returned, white roses in a crystal vase that probably cost more than I'd spent on her entire 5th birthday party. She looked up nervously, still raw from our garage conversation. "Where did you go?" she asked, trying for casual but landing on anxious. "Had some business to handle," I said, setting my keys on the counter. "Property matters." Something in my tone made her hand still at the roses. "What kind of property matters?" "The kind where we finally discuss who really owns this house, Rachel." The vase slipped from her fingers, shattering on the Italian marble, white roses scattered like surrendered flags across the perfect floor. If this revelation made your heart race, you're not alone. Hit that like button right now, because sometimes the truth needs witnesses. And subscribe, because this story is far from over.
The country club lunch was supposed to be Rachel's triumph, showing off her successful life to the Connecticut elite. Instead, it became the moment her carefully constructed facade began to crack. Rachel insisted on damage control. After our conversation about the house ownership, she'd spent 2 days in frantic preparation mode, scheduling lunches, arranging meetings, desperately trying to maintain her narrative while the truth lurked beneath like a structural crack in her social foundation. "Just this one lunch," she pleaded, adjusting my borrowed suit jacket. Matthew's, of course, because my own clothes weren't appropriate for the Willowbrook Country Club. "The Hartmans are important. She's on the school board, and he owns half the commercial real estate in town. Please, Dad, just be discreet." Discreet. Code for invisible, silent, compliant with her fiction. The country club dining room gleamed with old money confidence. Dark wood, leather chairs, windows overlooking a golf course so green it looked painted. The Hartmans arrived precisely at noon, all practiced smiles and firm handshakes. Patricia Hartman's pearls probably cost more than my truck, while James Hartman's watch screamed Swiss precision and inherited wealth. "So wonderful to finally meet Rachel's business associate," Patricia cooed, her eyes conducting a thorough evaluation of my worth. "Construction consulting must be fascinating." "It has its moments," I replied, cutting into the overpriced salmon. "Like when you realize a beautiful facade might be hiding structural damage." Rachel's wine glass paused at her lips. Matthew shifted uncomfortably, but I continued, meeting Patricia's curious gaze. "Sometimes the prettiest houses have the weakest foundations. Built too fast, corners cut, truth sacrificed for appearance." James Hartman leaned forward, genuinely interested. "You must see a lot of that in your field. People wanting to look successful rather than actually being solid." "More than you'd imagine," I said, glancing at Rachel's pale face. "I once knew a family who spent everything on the exterior while the inside rotted. Beautiful curb appeal, but you couldn't trust the floors to hold weight. How metaphorical, Patricia said, though something in her expression suggested she sensed undercurrents. Rachel, you never mentioned how you met Mr. Porter. The moment stretched taut like piano wire. Rachel's mouth opened, closed, her prepared lies colliding with my steady gaze. Matthew jumped in with smooth lawyer precision, through mutual connections in Portland. Small world, really. But James, the 8-year-old who joined us after his tennis lesson, piped up with devastating innocence. "I thought you said he was Grandpa when you were crying in the garage, Mom." The silence that followed could have swallowed Connecticut whole. Patricia's eyes widened with delight of someone who just discovered premium gossip. James Hartman's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp evaluation. Matthew looked like he might have a stroke. And Rachel looked like someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. "Grandpa," Patricia's voice dripped honey-coated poison. "How interesting. Rachel, you told us your father passed away years ago." There was a misunderstanding," she stammered, her composure shattering like her crystal vase. "No misunderstanding," I said quietly, setting down my fork. "I'm Michael Porter, Rachel's father, the one who worked construction for 40 years to put her through school, the one whose savings bought the house you've probably been to for dinner parties, the one she's ashamed to acknowledge because I don't fit the Willowbrook aesthetic." I stood up, pulling off Matthew's borrowed suit jacket. "You'll have to excuse me. I just remembered I don't belong here." The walk through that dining room felt eternal, past tables of watching eyes, through doors held by staff who'd overheard everything, into afternoon sunshine that felt like freedom after the suffocating pretense inside. Behind me, I heard Patricia's voice, carrying perfectly in the acoustics designed for eavesdropping. "Your father? The one you said was dead? Oh, Rachel, this is extraordinary." If you've ever stood up for your truth in a room full of lies, you know this feeling. Don't let this moment pass by without subscribing, because courage needs witnesses, and sometimes we need reminders that we're worth more than someone else's shame. By evening, the country club catastrophe had spread through Willowbrook like wildfire, and Rachel stood in her perfect kitchen, watching her social standing crumble with every unanswered phone call and canceled invitation. The house felt like a mausoleum when I returned from a long drive through Connecticut's back roads. Rachel sat at her kitchen island, surrounded by her phone, tablet, and laptop, all silent, all representing connections that had severed the moment Patricia Hartman started her whisper campaign. 7 canceled dinner invitations, she said without looking up, her voice hollow. Sophia, been uninvited from Ashley's birthday party. The country club is reviewing our membership. Matthew's senior partner called to express concerns about family transparency. She looked up then, and I saw something I hadn't seen since her mother's death. Complete devastation. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? I wanted to be your father, not your secret. Well, congratulations. Now everyone knows. Everyone knows I lied, that I'm not who I pretended to be, that my father is... She stopped, unable to finish. A construction worker? A man who built things instead of inherited them? Someone who loved you enough to give you everything only to be hidden away like dirty laundry? Matthew emerged from his office, his face bearing the shell-shocked expression of someone whose calculated life had gone off script. The Singapore deal fell through. They cited concerns about family complications. Do you understand what you've cost us? Cost you? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you about cost. Cost is selling tools I'd collected for 30 years to pay for Rachel's MBA.
Cost is working until my hands bled to make sure she never went without. Cost is driving across the country to see my daughter, only to be told I'm an embarrassment. Dad, please. And speaking of cost, I continued, pulling out the trust documents Tom had prepared, let's discuss who actually owns this house. I spread the papers on their marble island, watching their faces change as they read. Rachel's hands shook. Matthew's legal training kicked in, his eyes scanning for loopholes that didn't exist. 70% ownership, Matthew read aloud. How is that possible? Because I paid for it. Every penny of the down payment. Check the records if you don't believe me. Rachel's name is on the deed, but the money, that was my life's work, liquidated so she could live in a neighborhood where she'd pretend I didn't exist. What do you want? To kick us out? To humiliate us further? I want my grandchildren to know who I am. I want them to understand that their grandfather built things that lasted, that their mother came from love, not just ambition. I want the truth to matter more than perception. James appeared in the doorway, drawn by raised voices. Grandpa, are you really Mom's dad? Before Rachel could intercept, I knelt down to his level. Yes, buddy, I'm your grandpa. I taught your mom to fish, to build things, to be strong. And you know what? I'm proud of who I am. Cool! James ran to me, wrapping his small arms around my neck. Can you teach me to build things too? Over his shoulder, I saw Rachel's face crumble, not with shame this time, but with recognition of what she had nearly stolen from her children, their heritage, their history, their connection to something real. The house stays in trust for the kids. They inherit when they're old enough to understand its real value. Until then, you can live here, but no more lies, no more pretending I'm dead or distant or irrelevant. I'm their grandfather, and I'm done being your secret. Every child deserves to know where they come from. If this truth resonates with you, if you believe in the power of authentic love over false appearances, hit that subscribe button now. Don't let another day pass living in someone else's shame. 3 weeks later, sitting in my Portland workshop, I received a video that changed everything. My grandson James, proudly showing his classmates the birdhouse we'd built together, announcing, "My grandpa taught me this. He builds real things with his hands." The Oregon rain drummed against my workshop roof as I shaped another piece of cherry wood, letting the familiar rhythm of creation soothe the ache that had followed me home from Connecticut. 3 weeks had passed since I'd laid bare the truth about the house, about ownership, about the price of being someone's shameful secret. My phone buzzed, another message from Rachel. They'd been coming daily, each one a little more honest than the last. But this one was different. A video. I set down my tools and opened it. There was James, standing in front of his third-grade class, holding the birdhouse we'd built during my last day in Connecticut, the one real afternoon we'd had together before I left. His voice carried clearly through the phone speaker. "This is what my grandpa taught me to make. He lives in Oregon and builds houses with his hands. He's not rich or famous, but he built the house we live in. Well, he paid for it with money he saved from working really hard. He taught my mom everything when she was little, and now he's teaching me. He says the most important thing about building is making sure your foundation is strong, because everything else depends on that." The teacher's voice came through. "That's wonderful, James. What else did your grandfather teach you?" "That you should never be embarrassed about working hard, and that love is more important than looking perfect, and that the best things in life are built, not bought." The video blurred as tears filled my eyes, but there was more. The camera shifted, and there was Rachel,
standing in the back of the classroom. She stepped forward, her voice clear despite its trembling. "James is right. His grandfather, my father, is the strongest man I know. I forgot that for a while, got lost in trying to be someone I thought was better. But there's nothing better than being loved by someone who gives you everything and asks only for truth in return." The video ended with James running to hug his mother, both of them crying, the classroom applauding. Real applause for something genuine, not the polite golf claps of country club performances. My phone rang immediately, Rachel's voice thick with tears. "Dad, did you watch it?" I watched it. "I've been horrible, worse than horrible. I took your love, your sacrifice, your entire life's work, and I tried to hide it because I was afraid of being judged by people whose opinions shouldn't matter. I taught my children that appearance matters more than truth. I almost lost everything real for something fake. Rachel, no, please let me finish. Matthew and I are separating, not because of the house revelation, but because he helped me perpetuate the lie. He was comfortable with me hiding you, and that's not the kind of marriage I want to model for our children. I want them to see that integrity matters more than status." I sat in my workshop, surrounded by tools that had built tangible things, listening to my daughter rebuild herself with words. She continued, "I'm bringing the kids for Thanksgiving, to your house, your real house. I want them to see where I grew up, to understand that love doesn't need marble countertops and 3-car garages. And Dad, I want to learn to build something with you, something real, like we used to." "The workshop's waiting," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Always has been." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering Oregon dusk, thinking about foundations and facades, about the houses we build and the homes we make. The trust documents for the Connecticut house sat in my desk drawer, ensuring my grandchildren would inherit something valuable. But the real inheritance, the knowledge of where they came from, the pride and honest work, the understanding that love isn't something to hide, that was already being transferred. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the truth about ourselves. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of authentic love over false pretenses, please subscribe now. Share this with someone who needs to remember that they're enough, exactly as they are.
6 months later, on a sunny Portland afternoon, I watched my daughter teach her son to sand wood in the same workshop where I'd taught her, and realized that some foundations, once properly rebuilt, become stronger than ever. The workshop smelled of sawdust and possibility, the same as it had 30 years ago, when a young Rachel would spend hours here learning that patience and skill could transform raw materials into something beautiful. Now she stood beside James, guiding his small hands as he sanded the jewelry box they were making for Sophia's birthday. "Gentle strokes," Rachel said, echoing words I'd told her decades ago. "Let the wood tell you what it needs." Sophia sat on the workbench, sketching designs for the box's lid, while Matthew, surprisingly, worked on assembling a bookshelf in the corner. He'd been coming around more lately, not as Rachel's husband, their divorce had been finalized 2 months ago, but as someone learning that there was dignity in creating something with your own hands. "Grandpa, look!" James held up his sanding block, proud of the smooth surface he'd created. "Is it ready?" I ran my weathered fingers across the wood, feeling the grain he'd carefully revealed. "Perfect, buddy. You've got the touch." Rachel smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes without calculation or performance. She'd sold the Connecticut house, my gift to her, finally, and bought a modest place here in Portland, 15 minutes from my workshop. The country club crowd had written her off completely, but she found something better: truth. "I got the teaching position," she announced suddenly, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "Portland Community College wants me to develop their entrepreneurship program. They were impressed that I wanted to focus on family businesses and traditional trades, not just tech startups. That's wonderful, sweetheart. She moved closer, lowering her voice while the kids focused on their projects. I told them about you in the interview, about how you built your construction business from nothing, how you taught me that real value comes from serving your community, not impressing it. They want you to guest lecture. Me? Teaching college kids? Teaching them what matters, that success isn't just about money or status. It's about building something that lasts, whether that's a house, a business, or a family. I thought about the trust documents, still preserving the Connecticut house sale proceeds for James and Sophia's futures. They'd have resources, yes, but more importantly, they'd have the knowledge of where those resources came from. Honest work, genuine sacrifice, and love that didn't require hiding. "What do you think I'm proudest of?" Rachel asked, watching James teach Sophia his newly learned sanding technique. "They'll never feel like they have to hide where they come from. They'll never be ashamed of their grandfather who works with his hands, or their mother who chose truth over status." Matthew approached, holding up his completed bookshelf with genuine pride. "First thing I've ever built. There's something different about creating rather than just acquiring, isn't there?" I nodded, understanding that this privileged man was discovering what I'd always known, that real satisfaction comes from contribution, not consumption. As the afternoon sun slanted through the workshop windows, painting golden stripes across the sawdust-covered floor, I watched my family, my real family, not the performed version, work together on something tangible. Rachel's phone sat silent on the workbench, no longer buzzing with social obligations and strategic connections. Instead, the only sounds were sandpaper on wood, quiet concentration, and occasional laughter when James made silly faces at his sister. "Dad," Rachel said, her hand finding mine, calloused now from her own projects, "I need you to know something. The house in Connecticut, the life I built there, I thought I was building up, but I was actually building walls. Walls between me and you, between my children and their heritage, between who I was and who I pretended to be." She squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with tears and clarity. "You didn't just give me money for that house. You gave me the chance to learn that homes aren't built on property values or social status. They're built on truth, on love that doesn't require editing, on the courage to be exactly who we are." James looked up from his work, sawdust in his hair, grinning with the pure joy of creation. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to build things like you, real things that help people." "You already are, buddy," I said, pulling him close with one arm while keeping Rachel's hand in mine. The workshop held us all in its familiar embrace. 4 generations if you counted the memory of Rachel's mother in every tool she'd once touched, every project she helped complete before cancer took her. But she was here too, in Rachel's determination, in Sophia's artistic eye, in James's eager hands learning the family trade. This is what redemption looks like. Not perfect, not without scars, but real. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, you understand that sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find our truth. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to rebuild on a foundation of honesty. Love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, truth, and the courage to be seen for who we really are.